For watching Outnumbered Overtime. At the bottom of your screen are the handles for all three of our platforms. I'll see you online. I'm Harris. Here's Dana.
Fox News Alert, Secretary of Defense James Mattis is on his way to the White House to meet with President Trump to discuss the latest target options in Syria after another apparent chemical weapons attack by the Assad regime targeting his own people. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. I'll also talk to Speaker Paul Ryan in his first interview after announcing this morning that he will not seek re-election in November. But first, national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with the latest on Syria. Jennifer.
Dana, Mattis is expected to brief the president any minute now to present the latest military options for Syria in the Oval Office. Planning has been going on since the weekend. A few hours ago, Mattis spoke from the Pentagon while meeting the Dutch defense minister, but was non-committal when asked about the alleged Syrian chemical attack.
Have you seen enough evidence that to blame the Assad regime for this most recent chemical attack? Have you seen evidence confident to make that assessment?
We're still assessing the intelligence ourselves and our allies. We're still working on this.
Is the U.S. military ready right now to conduct a retaliatory strike if ordered?
We stand ready to provide military options if they're appropriate, as the president determines. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Concerns about telegraphing our military moves in Syria?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
The U.S. already has a guided missile destroyer in position off the coast of Syria. The USS Donald Cook has roughly 75 Tomahawk missiles on board and 20 surface-to-air missiles in the event that Russian warplanes attempt to challenge it. Then there's the French frigate, known as the Aquitaine, already in position with about 16 cruise missiles on board. One of the first phone calls President Trump made after indications of a chemical weapon attack emerged was to French President Emmanuel Macron. New satellite images obtained from ImageSat International appear to show that Russia's 11 warships seen in the vicinity of its naval base in Tartus, Syria, have put out to sea within recent hours. Russia has threatened to engage any warships that fire on Syria. A high-level delegation of Russian lawmakers arrived in Damascus today, Dana, to meet with Syrian President Bashar Assad. It's not clear what their message will be. Back to you.
All right, well, we'll stick in close contact with you, Jennifer. Thank you. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan making a major announcement saying he will not run for another term this November. I just spoke with the Speaker before we learned that Secretary Mattis was heading to the White House. Speaker Ryan was in his interview, giving his first interview since his announcement this morning. Watch. Joining me now is the man of the hour, House Speaker Paul Ryan. Mr. Speaker, you've come a long way from waiting tables at Tortilla Coast to the Speaker's office. But did you ever really feel like a D.C. swamp creature kind of guy?
No, I never really did. I always felt like a Wisconsin guy that came to Washington, to Congress, to make a difference. And I'm really gratified that I feel like I've made a big difference. I've accomplished much of what I wanted to do. And you know me well. Our kids are now teenagers. And I just came to the basic conclusion. I feel like our majority's in good hands. The president's given us this chance to get a lot done, which we've gotten a lot done. And with teenagers at home, I do another term, and they will really only know me as a weekend dad. You have to remember, I came to Congress before I had kids, so they've only known me as a weekend dad. And if I do another term, that's all they'll ever know me as, and that's just something I just can't do.
Well, I think a lot of people would understand that. I do wonder, I know that you've talked about, entitlement reform being one of those missed opportunities, but a big one. I mean, CBO just announced on Monday the deficit figures, and looking at them now, $804 billion in 2018, but if we do nothing, looking at $1.5 trillion in 2018. And in addition to that, you also saw that the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, repeal and replace did not happen. Is that something, those two things, do you think you'll continue to work on those in whatever you decide to do next?
Those two things are one and the same. So repealing and replacing Obamacare is entitlement reform, and that's the one big thing that I've always wanted to do that we still haven't done. But I'm proud of the fact that the House has done it. Ever since I became the head of the Budget Committee, which is a number of years ago, the House has passed budgets which actually balance the budget and pay off the debt, pay down the debt. The House did pass the biggest entitlement reform bill last year that Congress has ever considered. which would have done more to shave trillions of dollars of debt off the books than anything else Congress has ever done.
Maybe some
So
of
I'm
your
really
allies
proud.
some of your allies might think that you might need to run for the Senate then if you want
right.
to
So
get more done.
that's the one thing is it missed by one vote in the Senate. So
Yeah.
do I regret the Senate missing this opportunity of a lifetime to reduce the debt and bring down health care premiums? Yeah. I'm proud of the fact that the House has consistently passed these bills. The House passed this bill. The Senate didn't. And so there's more to do, but I do feel like we've done a lot to advance this cause. We're not there yet, but I think we'll get there because we have to do this.
Well, you've been a fundraising juggernaut, and I think some people might be surprised that you made the decision to leave because, as I understand it, you hit your goal of the fundraising number 7 months early because you were trying to help other Republicans or try to keep their seats. But 58 members of Congress are not seeking re-election this year, and there was some feeling today that are you perhaps abandoning the troops in the middle of a pretty tough midterm?
No, not at all. Because first of all, I'm going to keep doing the fundraising. I've broken every record that any speaker's ever had on fundraising, and I'm going to keep running through the tape on that. Second, I don't think anybody's election is going to hinge on whether or not Paul Ryan is Speaker of the House. I think we're going to have a strong record to run on. We're going to have the resources to communicate our story. So I feel very good about things. The reason you see a lot of retirements among us in the House is because we have term limits. We have term limits on committee chairmen, and most of those chairmanships are now ending. And so people naturally retire when their chairmanships end. So that's why I think you have a lot of that. And plus, we've gotten a lot done. We did tax reform for the first time in a generation. We rebuilt the military from being hollowed out, which was really important. We've deregulated the economy, which is really helping the economy grow. We're on to workforce development and infrastructure. So we ran on an agenda in 2016, and we've been executing that agenda. We're 2/3 of the way through getting it done into law. Even with the Senate as slow as they are, we're going to be repealing and replacing Dodd-Frank. So we're actually getting a great deal done for the country. Because of that and all these term limits that people are running into is why you see some of these extra retirements. But we really feel like we're leaving the majority in good hands to Republicans because we have a really good record to run on.
There are still 19 states that have not had their filing deadlines passed. What advice would you have for members of Congress who are on the fence on whether they should run this year?
Well, obviously, I think people should stay. Look, my experience, being Speaker of the House is a lot different than being a member of Congress. When I was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, I was home with my family during congressional recesses. Last week, I was in San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Corpus Christi, Texarkana, and Austin, just to name a few, in Wisconsin. So that's a little different in this job. This job, because of it, requires a great deal of travel. Such to the point where I basically see my family on Sundays, and that's just when your kids are growing. We were looking at colleges a week ago.
Do you plan to stay?
It's a fleeting thing. That's why. I'm going to stay through the term. I'm going to stay through January.
But do you plan to stay in Janesville?
Yeah.
Do you think you'll keep your family there?
Yeah. I have no plans to change any of that.
I wanted to ask you about just the change of the Republican Party over time since you first got there. I know that Jack Kemp was really an inspiration for you when you started. And the small government conservative is sort of, in some ways, becoming extinct. And you're leaving Congress, I certainly adds to that. President Trump and you have developed a good and healthy relationship. You've come a long way from where he used to say that Paul Ryan is a man who doesn't know how to win. What was it that changed in your relationship between the campaign and then the end of last year where you were able to get those accomplishments that you've been talking about?
Yeah, we didn't actually know each other. So honestly, Dana, it's just knowing each other. We spend a great deal of time with each other. I'm having dinner with him tonight. We speak on the phone constantly. So honestly, we've just developed a good friendship. We've developed a good rapport. He is the one who gave us, with his victory, this ability to get all this work done. So I'm very excited about that. And you mentioned small government conservative. That's alive and well here in Congress, in the House of Representatives. Again, we've passed over 500 bills here in the House. We're passing the balanced budget amendment on Thursday. We've passed the budget to repeal and replace Obamacare, which would have saved trillions of dollars of debt reduction. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get all of these bills through the Senate onto the president's desk because of the filibuster. And that's just a regrettable thing. But the point I'm trying to make, Dana, is the reason our relationship is so good is because we now know each other extremely well and we work very closely together. But also, all these things that we fought for are alive and well here in the House. And by the way, we've gotten an incredible amount done. I mean, just the things we've already gotten done in the last 15 months is something that usually takes Congress 4 or 5 years to do. So we're very pleased with the progress we've made.
Do you see that there would be any additional legislative accomplishments between now and November?
Oh, absolutely. We're moving on to our workforce development agenda. which is focused on streamlining career and technical education and getting people from welfare to work. We think that's really important. Plus, we're going through our infrastructure agenda as well. So we've got a lot more work to do just this term, and those plans are in place. It's what we said we would do when we ran on the Better Way agenda, and that's what we're going to be executing in the weeks to come.
I know that it was Speaker Pelosi who, I know you have a good working relationship with her too, but certainly the Democrats took those workforce development rules that you want to put forward, and they said that you were the kind of guy that would want to throw Granny off the cliff. Will you miss any of that, sort of the personal attacks in Washington?
No, I don't. I'm so used to it, I don't really think about it. I consider it what my old boss and mentor Jack Kemp said with the battle of ideas. I think it's just the right thing to do that an able-bodied person who's on welfare works for those benefits, goes to school, or works for a job. We've got 6.6 million jobs available in this country. We've got over that many people who are able-bodied, who aren't working or looking for work or in school. And so we need to bring these people out of poverty, off of welfare, into the workforce. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for the person who is stuck in poverty. It's the right thing to do for the economy and for our communities. And so I know we're on the right side of things, and that's the next agenda we're going to be pursuing.
My last question for you. I know you're not going to weigh in on who you think should succeed you or be the next Speaker of the House. I know that Kevin McCarthy and Congressman Scalise, they're both got their names, I guess, in the hat. But do you think it's possible that the leadership struggle that is going to take place in the next few months will actually take away from the ability of the Republicans to hold the House in November?
No, I really don't. I don't. I think that's just internal D.C. gossip. That's pretty much leaves at the edge of the Beltway. And I know we're all focused on executing this agenda, keeping our majority, and we have a very strong leadership team. That's one of the reasons why I took comfort in making this decision, because I know there's a capable leadership team I can hand the gavel on to.
Well, not an easy decision to make, but congratulations to you for making that decision, and to Jana and the kids. Certainly thank you for all you've done.
All right. Thank you, Dana. Take care.
All right. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. And joining us with reaction to Speaker Ryan's announcement, Capitol Hill veterans Michael Meehan and Josh Holmes. But we begin with Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report. It's funny to have such a big announcement like the resignation, or I should say retirement, of the Speaker of the House, and for it to be sort of just kind of like steady as she goes. This is no big deal. There's nothing to see here. There's no problems. All understandable that he wants to spend more time with his family. I absolutely get not wanting to be a weekend dad. But I wanted to get your take. How big a deal is this for Washington right now headed into this midterm election?
It's a big deal. Look, no one could blame Paul Ryan for not wanting to be in Congress anymore. Congress is awful, truly wretched. And I don't blame anybody. As a matter of fact, most Americans aren't in Congress, and that's probably and you can understand why. But in this moment, what Ryan has done here is invariably open up a fratricidal leadership fight. Now, there is maybe there's a possibility that he has orchestrated some way so that either McCarthy or Scalise or somebody, or maybe somebody steps aside and there's some sort of smooth transition. But I tell you, by June, July, there's going to be either a designated replacement or there's going to be a serious turf war going on. I do not think that Ryan is going to be able to hold this in some kind of custodial nature for the remainder of this year and try to get through midterms. That's just not going to happen.
I was also interested, I'm sure you've heard too, that over this past several months as members have decided whether to run again. Some of them decided to run again because they believe that Speaker Paul Ryan deserved their support. And now Paul Ryan is going to retire, and there's 19 additional states that have yet to have their filing deadlines pass. And there are other members, just another one today. Dennis Ross, the Republican congressman in Florida, decided to retire today. How many others do you think could happen between now and those filing deadlines end of June?
I suspect that by the time we get to Election Day, we will look back on this day as a signal moment, a tipping point moment in what happens with control of Congress. It's not Paul Ryan's duty as an American or his job to stay. And because remember, one of the big issues here is there's his control over his base, over the rank and file, in the House was a big question even before the giant spending bill that they shoved through. After the spending bill, no chance. And now with the leadership fight coming, so his ability to even control the conference is already very much in doubt before this happened.
Right.
On the other side of it, if you get to the point where more members say, you know what, I'm not running, because you're right, we have a lot of filing dates still to come. We still have primaries. There's still time for people to drop out. If this becomes the real alarm bell, coming on the heels as it did of that special election in Pennsylvania, if this becomes the real alarm bell for Republicans in the House to say, it's over, we're cooked, run for it, this will be a signal moment.
Well, they're going to have dinner tonight. Meantime, let me ask you also about Syria. We understand that Secretary Mattis, is on his way to the White House. There are indications, reports that there probably will not be any actual military action today. But I do want to read to you what Noah Rothman just wrote up at Commentary Magazine. I think we have it here. Imagine a post-World War II Germany, but without a Potsdam Conference that established firmly delineated zones and control. Instead, those zones are vague and fluid, and each power is testing the other to see where its freedom of action ends and another's begins. This is an unthinkably dangerous condition. The risk of an accident or miscalculation triggering a broader great power conflict is extraordinarily high. Establishing a semi-formal occupation regime is in the interest of world peace. Pretending we can avoid engagement in that project is a dangerous exercise in self-delusion. Your thoughts?
Exercises in self-delusion are what we do best in Washington. That's kind of our jam.
But when we have our military about to take some action, those considerations have to be quite carefully decided.
Secretary Mattis, of course, is well aware of the political considerations here, that you have a president whose base will not tolerate anything that seems like nation building. We have a relatively light footprint in Syria as it compared to other bigger nation-building exercises like Iraq and Afghanistan, but even that relatively small footprint is too much for a lot of people who support the president, and that's why the president, just before the chemical weapons attack, was saying we're going to get out of Syria ASAP. Now, Mattis knows that there's not going to be a stomach inside this administration for what Rothman's talking about there with a Potsdam-style divided Berlin and blah, 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 blah. That's not in this administration. So Mattis has to think about that political reality as he talks about the tactical, practical reality in that space. That's a tough spot.
Indeed. All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
You bet.
And we'll have more reaction to Speaker Ryan's announcement with our panel. Plus, the raid on the president's personal attorney now raising concerns about the Russia investigation and how the White House is responding. And the first woman to serve as Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, joins me as President Trump and the Pentagon prepare for likely action against Syria.
I think it's very dangerous because terrible things have happened there with the chemical attack. And I do think that there needs to be some response. But it can't just be a one-off.
So what does Speaker Paul Ryan's exit from Congress mean for the midterms? Who better to talk to about this than Michael Meehan, former Chief of Staff for Senator Maria Cantwell, and now President and CEO of Squared Communications, Josh Holmes, former Chief of Staff to Senator Mitch McConnell and founding partner of Calvary. All right, guys, this was a big, well, in some ways it had been rumored for a while. He had not filed to run for re-election yet. And yet it does come as pretty big news, and it will certainly set off a scramble for who's going to be the next speaker. Josh Holmes, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I got a lot of respect for Paul Ryan. Obviously, when you hear most politicians talk about leaving Congress to spend more time with their family, you wonder what's up. With him, you know it's the genuine article. I mean, this is somebody who has reluctantly accepted the speakership in the first place. His colleagues basically begged him to take it because they knew that he could provide that leadership at a critical time for their conference, and he did. And he has stood at the top of that conference and led them to some really important accomplishments. The next chapter, of course, is pretty difficult because he's got very big shoes to fill.
Now, Michael, he says, Speaker Ryan says that it didn't have anything to do with the tough midterm that they were facing. He has raised a ton of money for Republicans in those races, but there are a historic number of Republicans who decided not to seek re-election. There could be more. We had yet another one today, Dennis Ross of Florida deciding not to run. Do the Democrats really feel like they've got a shot here?
Oh, for sure. I mean, Paul Ryan was the 40th House member on the Republican caucus to retire, along with Mr. Ross. Clearly, he made a crucial mistake. He took a job he didn't love. You heard him talk about the time as on the Ways and Means Committee chairman. He came to this town to be a deficit hawk, and he just passed $3 trillion in spending and tax cuts. That's totally anathema to what the man came to Washington to do. So I can see why he'd be sick and tired of his job. I admire his 20 years of public service, but clearly the political winds are just totally swirling around, given the timing of his announcement.
Josh, the Speaker had a tough approval rating. I think the Wall Street Journal just last month put him at a 24% approval rating. Now, that was pretty much in line with Nancy Pelosi's. Hers is around 21%. You worked for Mitch McConnell when he ran for re-election this last time in the Senate, and his approval rating was also down. It's part of just being a member of leadership. What do you think about the future of the Republican Party, and what will it say about who actually runs and wins the speakership going forward?
Well, look, this is the price you pay for leadership in Congress. You know, the modern day model is that if you want to be liked and you're concerned about your approval rating, you certainly shouldn't be a leader of one of the parties in the House or the Senate. It just comes with the territory. You have to make extremely difficult decisions. You have to make concessions that go against your ideological base, and basically everything you do alienates the other side of the aisle. And so you are stuck in the middle, but that is the price of leadership, and that's why you have to have strong leaders like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell doing the job that they do on a daily basis. I think whoever succeeds him, the first thing that they need to understand is that they're not going to be everybody's most popular guy out there or girl out there. They are going to be extremely under a lot of different pressures, and that just comes with the territory.
Michael, I do want to ask you about the message for the Democrats going forward, because clearly we know that midterms are usually a referendum on whoever is in the Oval Office. This happens to be President Trump this year. The Democrats have a very solid anti-Trump message. Like, that's what they're banking on that. But at some point, does that leave too much ground on the table policy-wise for Democrats to actually go to the polls and vote for something? Do they need to change tactic and have something positive to run on, especially if the economy continues to be as good as it is right now?
Well, it's been my experience that you don't really craft your message in April for the November elections, because we're too far out for that to actually know what the final closing argument is. Because 80% of the people who are going to vote in November already know how they're going to vote no matter what's said between now and then both parties fight it out for the 20% in the middle. I mean, if we get to go to the election today, I think we win the House because we're performing 12, 13 points better than Hillary Clinton with 40 open House seats. If you decide to run for re-election in the United States House of Representatives and you're scandal-free, you have a 90% chance of winning your seat back. If it's wide open, then the wins, the national wins, tend to take over a little bit more. And so, if I get to take my candidates to the polls and say the Trump tariff tax is affecting your soybeans here in Iowa, I got a few more House seats in Iowa that are in play that weren't in play before because of what the president chose to do. Now, he may not, in fact, ever do that in the end, and this just could be the bidding war that he has. But it sort of depends, sort of where we are in the closing argument.
So don't make the argument in April. You wait until October. I'm sorry, guys. I've got to run. They are wrapping me in the control room. Michael Meehan and Josh Holmes, thank you.
All right, thanks.
All right, Dana.
We stand ready to provide military options if they're appropriate, as the president determines. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Concerned about telegraphing our military moves in Syria?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
As the president meets with Defense Secretary Mattis on the military options in Syria, how are our allies responding? Fox News alerts Syria and Russia preparing for U.S. airstrikes as President Trump vows to take action following another suspected chemical attack. Defense Secretary Mattis now meeting with the president discussing military options. John Roberts standing by at the White House. But we begin with Mike Tobin live in Jerusalem. Mike.
And Dana, we'll start off with a possible indicator that the Russians are preparing to protect their equipment in the event of U.S. military strikes. With images first obtained by Fox News from an organization called ImageSat International, show the Syrian port of Tartus. Earlier today, the images showed 11 Russian naval craft in the port. Now only one sub remains at that port, according to the last images obtained. The other ships are now presumed to be at sea. Also, the French daily Le Figaro is is reporting that the Syrian army is evacuating military bases and transferring aircraft to bases with strong Russian presence. All of this following the well-known threats by the U.S. to respond to what is now widely believed to be a chemical attack on Syrian opposition militias and civilians as well. A high-ranking Russian general warns that Russian forces are on the ground, and if threatened, retaliatory measures will be taken. Eurocontrol, the air traffic control authority in Europe, has put out a warning for aircraft flying in the eastern Mediterranean about the possibility of disruption to navigation equipment in the event of military action. Most airlines avoid the area. Only Lebanon's Middle Eastern Air flies directly over Syria. That airline has temporarily rerouted flights. Dana?
All right, Mike, thank you. Now let's go to our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. John, what can you tell us about the meeting? Is it happening now?
We believe that it has just concluded, but we also have some other breaking news that we want to top this with. The Deputy National Security Advisor, Nadia Shadlow, has resigned her position effective April 10th. She will leave on April the 27th. This, again, another move that follows the resignation of Tom Bossert as John Bolton, the new National Security Advisor, takes over and assembles his own team. We do not know who will be Shadlow's replacement just yet. But again, Nadia Shadlow, who was Deputy National Security Advisor picked by H.R. McMaster, will be leaving the White House as of April the 27th. Now, the president engaged in some serious saber rattling towards Syria and Russia in the aftermath of that suspected chemical weapons attack over the weekend. The president tweeting this morning, quote, "Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming. Nice and new and, quote, smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it." Senator Lindsey Graham today saying the president should launch an attack against Syria. Listen here.
He needs to go big because Assad has defied the president, he's defied the international community, he's defied human decency, and now's the time for this guy to pay a heavy, heavy price. And anything short of that, I think, will embolden him and others.
A Russian military official today insisting that Syria had nothing to do with the gas attack. Spokesperson for the Russian military saying, quote, "The notorious White Helmets," and that's the emergency group that we see operating there in Syria, who operate as part of terrorist groups, staged and filmed a chemical weapons attack on civilians in the town of Duma. That statement stands in direct contradiction to what Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the other day when he said that there's no evidence of chemical weapons being used. So we've got a Russian military official saying they were used, but it was staged, and now Lavrov saying there was no chemical weapons. So the Russians on completely opposite pages here. Iran also vowing some sort of retaliation if Syria is struck. So, Dana, what we clearly know at this point is that there is an escalation of this as we seem to be in the inexorable march toward some sort of military action.
All right, John, thank you. Let's bring in Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. As all of this gets underway, I want to ask you about what you think Congress's role is in regards to this. I mean, I know that the authorization to use military force going back to 2001 has been in operation since then, but there are calls that Congress should actually do more. What are your thoughts?
Look, if the president decided to come to Congress, I'd absolutely vote for this. The authority to give him authority in Syria, and I'd be proud to do so. I don't think he needs to come to Congress. The fact is, this threatens national security. The job of Congress is very simple. We declare, according to the Constitution, if a state of war exists, and we provide the financial oversight and resources in terms of the execution of that. The president's job is to be commander-in-chief and to make those kinds of policy decisions. You have some out here that either, whether it's try to make news, whether they really believe it or whatever, that want Congress, 535 of us between the House and the Senate, to basically be apprised about every operational detail of the U.S. military. And the question is, where does that line end? I think the president is well within his authority to strike Syria, to strike him right now without coming to Congress, and he ought to do it.
Let me also ask you, and I don't have all that much time, but wanted to ask you about your thoughts about the retirement of your colleague and friend, Speaker Paul Ryan.
Well, it's sad. A lot of us saw it coming. He accomplished tax reform. We knew that he wanted to spend more time with his family. Great conservative warrior. He'll be sorely missed, and we'll have great people vying to replace him.
You stepped out of the Facebook hearing to come. What do you make of the hearing so far, and do you think that this is actually going to result in any sort of regulation against the company?
Well, I certainly hope it results in us getting a better grip of privacy. Since I've been in Congress, my committee, this is what we've been grappling with, is what's kind of the mix between free market and where government should have some regulation of privacy. So hopefully this is the beginning of that conversation. Well, I guess the middle of the conversation, but really taking it seriously now, because we've got to understand that while Facebook has a right in some cases to make money, we have a right to privacy, and there needs to be better communication about that.
All right, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thanks for stepping out of that hearing and joining us today.
You bet.
All right.
Anytime.
Bye-bye. So I'll sit down with former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and ask her what she thinks of President Trump's foreign policy.
I have not liked foreign policy by tweets, and so I think that especially the tone of the last one is troubling.
Shepard Smith on the Fox News desk. The president meeting with his defense secretary about U.S. options in Syria. This comes after the president warned about an American strike on Syria and told Russia to get ready for missiles. Expect the president's comments to be front and center today at the White House briefing. That's scheduled for 1/2 the next hour. We'll see you then on Shepard Smith Reporting.
Secretary of Defense James Mattis meeting with the president to discuss the latest target options in Syria after the suspected chemical attack that killed at least 40 civilians. Earlier today, I sat down with Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State. Watch. Madeleine Albright is the author of the new book, Fascism, A Warning. She's the first woman to be named Secretary of State serving under Bill Clinton, and we're so glad to have you with us today.
Great to be with you.
Because there's so much happening in the world, and as we speak, there are possibly actions happening right now in Syria with President Trump and the allies thinking about how they're going to respond to the recent use of chemical weapons in the area. Your thoughts on that at the moment of how that's happening?
Well, I think it's very dangerous because terrible things have happened there with the chemical attack. And I do think that there needs to be some response. But it can't just be a one-off. I think there really has to be some kind of a strategic approach to it and a plan. And I am worried about it. I have not liked foreign policy by tweets. And so I think that especially the tone of the last one is troubling to me, because I do think that what is essential is to deal with an issue from the perspective of the politics. It can't be resolved unless there's a political settlement of some kind, and some way of abiding by the Chemical Weapons Convention, which we're all signatories of.
I know that you are the ambassador to the UN as well, and our ambassador, Nikki Haley, is there today, once again being rebuffed by Russia and China, saying they are not going to allow for the United Nations to actually have a say here.
Well, it's outrageous, frankly, but I have to tell you this, is I was there when Sergei Lavrov, who's now the foreign minister, was the ambassador. There is nobody that understands how to write resolutions or stop resolutions or undermine the system than Sergei Lavrov. And so the fact that we put forward a resolution, they put forward a resolution, that there really is kind of a real stoppage of work. And so the question is, what should happen while people are suffering? And in some ways, Dana, it really reminds me a little bit of what happened on Kosovo, that the Russians were blocking whatever we wanted to do in the Security Council, which is why we went to NATO. And I do think that there needs to be some look at some coalition of the willing or some way to get out of the situation in the UN, which at the moment is not operating.
What did you make of over the weekend when Israel took action and the rest of the world didn't really say a peep, including Saudi Arabia, almost as if they were thinking it's better for Israel to do it if they are able to push back against Assad?
Well, I think that the Israelis didn't admit to it, but the kinds of things that they say is that they feel a threat from some of the drones and various things that are coming out that are being supported, as one reads about this, by Hamas or Iran, and that there had to be some way of saying this is unacceptable. But the Israelis did this, again, they never admit it, earlier in terms of stopping what they consider a threat to their security, basically coming from forces that are being supported by Iran.
Well, and also I wanted to ask you about North Korea. In your book, you talk about your efforts to try to push back against a missile program in North Korea. Does President Trump have a point when he says that the previous administrations failed? And when President Obama met with him that first day, after he'd won, he said, this is going to be your biggest foreign policy problem.
Well, I think the issue has been going on quite a long time. And when I was there, first of all, it was very well prepared. We had asked former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry to do a complete review of our North Korea policy because it was so complicated. And then what happened, the number 2 guy, Vice Marshal Cho, had come to the U.S., and we were in the Oval Office, and he presented President Clinton with an invitation for him to come to North Korea. And I think President Clinton did the right thing by saying, well, maybe at some point, but we have to be prepared. I'm sending the Secretary of State, which is why I went. Now, the thing that happened was that I was in the middle of negotiations, which at that stage had to do with missile limits. And then the election of 2000 happened. And I spoke to Colin Powell about all of this, and we didn't continue. And so there's always some explanation for it, but I do think that it is incredibly complicated. And it does also bear on what President Trump is saying about the Iran nuclear deal, because if you're trying to figure out something with the North Koreans, and in the meantime you're saying you're going to abrogate or you don't like the Iran deal.
I only have another minute with you. I wanted to ask you, in your book you talk about President Trump being sort of the least democratic president that you can remember. What do you mean by that? What worries you the most about that? Because it seems like America's democracy still seems very strong, but what are your concerns?
Well, I am concerned about various elements that he seems to ignore. I am a great believer in freedom of the press. I think it's very important. I think it's exceptionally important for there to be discussions, civil, good discussions. We may not all agree, but it's not the enemy of the people. So that bothers me, and it's being picked up by other countries. That's what now Orban in Hungary is saying. The other is kind of a lack of respect for the democratic institutions, and it concerns me that he acts as though he's above the law. So that is what concerns me about him.
Well, we will continue to follow all of those stories, of course, and your book, Fascism, A Warning, I enjoyed it very much, so thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Dana.
Now, a live look as Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is still under the spotlight in marathon testimony on Capitol Hill. What Zuckerberg is saying about his personal data and who was affected by the data breach.
You mentioned a few times that we're in an arms race with Russia. Yes. If you're giving Russian intelligence service agencies, potentially even on a valid request, access to global data that's not in Russia, is that kind of a disadvantage to us and an advantage to them?
Congressman, let me be more precise in my testimony.
Yeah, please.
I have no specific knowledge of any data that we've ever given to Russia.
Reddit has now banned nearly 1,000 accounts believed to be of Russian origin for spreading propaganda and misinformation on its platform. Reddit says the accounts have suspicious characteristics that suggest they originate from Russia's Internet Research Agency. The IRA, as it's known, is the so-called Russian troll farm the U.S. intelligence agencies say spread misinformation during the 2016 presidential election. A Fox News alert, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg back on Capitol Hill facing more tough questions from lawmakers about the privacy scandal and how the site protects users' data. Peter Doocy is right outside the hearing room. Peter, how is this testimony different from yesterday's?
It's different, Dana, because lawmakers here on the House side had a day and a night to figure out if Zuckerberg was telling the truth yesterday about things like drug trafficking on Facebook.
This scourge, this ravaging this country, is being enabled because of Facebook. So my question to you as we close on this, you've said before you were going to take down those ads, but you didn't do it. We've got statement after statement about things. You're going to take those down within days, and they haven't gone down. That, what I just put up, was just from yesterday. It's still up.
Congressman, right now, when people report the post to us, we will take them down.
And these House lawmakers have also had a day since observing their Senate colleagues yesterday to see how seriously Mark Zuckerberg is about fixing the errors that allowed the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica to obtain 87 million Facebook users' data to improve their own profits.
The fact that the CEO of Cambridge Analytica stepped down, does that in and of itself solve the issue and the controversy around what they did?
Congressman, I don't think so. There are a couple of big issues here. One is what happens specifically with Cambridge Analytica. How were they able to buy data from a developer that people chose to share it with? And how do we make sure that that can't happen again?
Zuckerberg also said that his personal information was maliciously obtained by a third party without his knowledge, so he is one of the 87 million that everybody keeps talking about. And at one point he said that he knows it is inevitable that Facebook will have to be regulated by the government in some way.
I kind of find it hard to believe that Mark Zuckerberg was taking the personality test on the site that then Cambridge Analytica got. They must have had it another way because he was a friend of somebody else's.
Nobody asked him about that, but there's still like 5 minutes left, so we might have our chance.
All right, Peter, thank you. Arizona teachers joining thousands nationwide demanding higher pay and more funding for education. The walkout is part of a wave of demonstrations in states led by conservatives. In Oklahoma, classes have been canceled for an 8th day in the state's biggest school district because of teacher walkouts. And we'll be right back.